Welcome back. We will now have our micro talks and panel session presented by EA. Our next set of speakers includes John Linden from Mythical Games, Chris Swan from Unit 2 Games, Neil Alphonso from Splash Damage, and Thierry Boulanger from Sabotage Studio. Please remember to write any questions that you may have in the Pine QA chat during these sessions, and we will address them during the panel. Let us first welcome John Linden from Mythical Games. They launched Blankos Block Party, which uses the blockchain to ensure each character in the game is unique and collectible. Today, John will share more information about this kind of collectible toys-to-life design model.
Hello, how's everybody doing? Do we have the slides coming up? There we go. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm going to do kind of a rapid fire talk here on what we're calling capturing digital value. And that's really kind of been our focus here at Mythical and what we're doing within this first video game, Blankos Block Party. So I think what we want to talk about, is really kind of where the industry has been moving to. And I think what we're seeing all these new stakeholders that are entering into the game economies themselves. And it's very exciting to where we're sitting on this, it depends on the stat of the day, it seems like, but I'd say between $155 and $180 billion global gaming industry, which is amazing. But what we love seeing is that there's these new multi-billion-dollar industries that are emerging on top of our game industry already, right? So the first one is kind of the game content. So it's Twitch and broadcasting through YouTube and video on demand and things like that. That's already a $6 billion market outside of APAC alone. Twitch is now up to nearly 2 billion hours a month. I had 1 billion in here, and they corrected me recently, saying, "Geez, that's so 2019." Because they've already nearly doubled since then, and 50% of YouTube is now gaming related. On top of that, we have the esports that has kind of emerged. So ways players can also now get sponsored or have tournament winnings and all that. So we're seeing all this, multi-billion-dollar industries emerge, and we really think what this is going to lead to is kind of this new frontier of digital value, to where assets now can be traded and collected and have monetary value, individual monetary value, just like a physical collectible could in the real world. And I think the other thing we've seen is that the stakeholders have really been shifting in the industry. So it's no longer kind of this scenario of having a game developer, game publisher, consumer relationship. Now we have brands that are getting involved. We have celebrity influencers that might want to be hitting their audience. We have the gaming influencers, which are just as famous now as the celebrity influencers, it seems. Artists that are coming into the ecosystem, esports teams that are competing and producing content. So the ecosystem has definitely changed pretty heavily. So one thing we're looking at in terms of how we think the future is going to be laid out is capturing that digital value. How do we have digital assets that have value? First of all, we start off with what we consider regulated ownership, right? We want to give the players the ability to own their assets legally and be able to sell them for real money legally to other players or marketplaces or exchanges, things like that. So that's kind of the fundamental part of what we've been working on here at Mythical is how to make that happen. And once you have that, you end up having these dual selling economies, right? Where you have a primary market, that $170 billion primary market through Xbox, PlayStation, and Steam, and all that. But now you start having the ability to have a secondary economy, so now players can start selling to each other directly, potentially. Sell through, in the game, on the web. Even you could even tie in external marketplaces like on eBay or in China, Tmall or something like that, to where there's external marketplaces now that can support these digital transactions. So now you have this whole selling economy, which is really fascinating. Perfect, thank you. So with the dual selling economies, there starts to be new ways that you can monetize game assets, right? There's actually transaction fees. As a game developer, you can pull out every single time an asset is sold. And I'll go through an example of that in a second. The next piece of that kind of comes out of this is that there's new player archetypes that start emerging. We think there's kind of two in particular that get very exciting for games. One is the trader speculator, people maybe that are wanting to come in and buy game assets off of consumers to hold and see if they appreciate in value over time. And we think that's an interesting group, but we think we're more interested in the group that we call the game entrepreneurs. The players that come in either in a free-to-play game or even in a premium game, they're buying up assets, they're leveling them up, they're changing them depending on the game design of a particular game, and they have an ability to resell those down the road. And we think that's going to become a really fascinating segment of players over time. And then out of that, we think that what happens when you start layering these all together is you get all types of new game design rules, right? So there's new ways you can do game design. There's new ways. It's almost like a palette of tools that you can start building off of. So we're really excited about this. We really think this is going to become kind of one of the main, a very, very strong future of games. Maybe not fully Ready Player One yet, but we think it's going to affect a lot of games in the future. So I was going to go through some hypothetical situations of what this could look like. So what's great about this type of idea is that when you have this ability to extract long-term value from assets, you can start getting these influencers and esports teams and brands vested in your game long-term. So here's kind of an idea. Is that any better? Are we good now? Okay. It's literally the software, it looks like. So, all right. So as we take an example with like a Lyric, and this is a hypothetical example, but a Lyric has 3 million followers on Twitch. And in this type of economy, what you can start doing is you can let him sell characters of his own in the game. You can let him have some creative control even, or collaboration around what his brand could look like in a game, and he could sell those in a primary market. And then once they're gone from the primary store, they would still be in a secondary market, and they could exchange hands from player to player over the lifetime of those assets, and he could actually make money off of that in a residual basis. So we think that's kind of an exciting opportunity. Twitch drops have really, really taken off and become very popular for influencers to where they're seeing increased engagement. They're seeing increased subscriptions while they're giving away game assets during their streaming. But in this type of economy now, what can happen is even though they're giving away maybe a limited number of these assets, maybe you're giving away 1,000 assets to 3 million followers, they can be immediately monetized once they're gone from that drop. So you can give the drop away for free, and they have an ability now to have real value over time. And we think that there's some really interesting things that can happen to where influencers now or esports teams can actually monetize free giveaways over time, which gets really exciting in this type of economy. The third one and fourth one I'll kind of go quickly through, but the idea there is that you could have game design mechanics to where maybe you get that first character in the store, you get the second character on a giveaway, and you can now do some type of game mechanic around it. You can blend them together, you can merge them together, you can craft a new object that can become incredibly, incredibly rare with maybe only 3 or 4 of them out in the entire world. So that could also have some really, really interesting impacts on the economy. And then the last one we have is kind of a one-of-a-kind. So, all right. Better again? So we can actually do a one-of-a-kind to where Lyric has his own character. And when you see him in the game, he's an authenticated character, and that is Lyric himself. Or maybe at the end of the season, he can give that out to a charity or something like that. So we also think there's a lot of interesting opportunities around brands, artists, all these type of constituents now that can actually be part of this. Working with brands now can actually bring your cost of acquisition down because they're actually helping promote the game because they have that vested interest. So this is the first game we've been working on called Blankos. We're working with a lot of different artists. We didn't actually create any of these characters on the top. They've all been created by vinyl toy artists in the spirit of a vinyl toy game, things like that. So we're proving this out. We have a first game called Blankos coming out. We're basically looking at bringing all these concepts of player ownership and scarce supply and all that into a mass market game. And I think what we've been excited about is we've been able to build this kind of sandbox type world set in this kind of wacky world of vinyl toys to prove these models out. But I think what we're most excited about is we've been able to bring the concept of ownership to players and still in a mass market way. So we're still able to get feedback from the big mass market game media channels and all that, even though we're bringing these new concepts. So I think that's really, really important is how you deliver that into a game to where it just feels like features of the game and it's not some new paradigm shift that people are looking for. So I'll just kind of end it. We started doing founder packs recently. It's really, really interesting opportunity to where players are coming in and becoming founders of the game. And I think what we've seen is that the ownership aspects, the ability that I have these limited edition assets, even before the game has created kind of a really, really interesting growth of revenue already for the game, even before it's out in private beta. So I guess that would be my shameless plug here is if you guys have any interest at all, come to blankos.com, grab a founders pack, and our private beta starts next Tuesday. So we're excited to kind of bring this world together of ownership into Blankos. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really interesting to hear about the use of the blockchain that way, and particularly to see those great designs. Our next panel is from Swan. They have been working on a game maker style platform community called Creta, which currently runs on Stadia. Chris will discuss the kind of gameplay innovations you can uncover and encourage via user-generated content and modding.
Hi, everybody. Can we have the slides up, please? Cool, thank you. Okay, so yes, over these next few slides, I'm going to explain a bit about what we at Unit 2 are making, and yes, about UGC, and also just the general trends of emerging technologies and what they're having their effect on game creativity. So for those who don't know us, Creator is a collaborative game development platform powered by Unreal Engine. Creator has a built-in editor that has two modes. The basic mode is accessible to anyone who has used games like Minecraft using just a controller, while advanced mode is a development environment that is more familiar to those who have used game engines such as Unity or Unreal. While the programming and deep-end development is only available in advanced mode, we provide a packaging system to wrap up those components and provide them as black boxes to the users in basic mode. This means we're already seeing some very sophisticated games being made using just the basic mode editor and a controller. Publishing is near instant and can be done at any time with the click of a button. The players are then greeted with a Netflix-style interface providing custom shelves of games for them to use. Creator launched on Google Stadia in July this year and is completely server-based, so even the creation is a fun multiplayer experience. We often say that with Creator you can make games in minutes, publish them in seconds and play instantly. So given our viewpoint, I'd like to share 5 observations of how we see some of these new technologies impacting creativity. The first is actually the process of being creative on itself. So normally when you're being creative, you very rarely have one idea and see it through to completion. You need to be able to sift through lots of ideas and find the one that is going to have kind of the most merit and work the best. So something that's often used is a 2-step process called divergent and convergent thinking. When you're in a divergent mode, you're basically letting your mind run riot. Anything goes, you can just entertain any idea, and you just want to try things quickly. You want to kind of noodle around, play, have a tinkerer's mindset, and just kind of sift very quickly through what could work and what couldn't. So with something like Creator, with no compile times, with the packages to speed things up, you can test out ideas very, very quickly. The second aspect is convergent. And when you're doing that, you want to kind of narrow down to the good ideas and just focus on those. And at that point, what you really want to do is get customer feedback as well. So to do that with Creator, you can just do a one-click publish, you can watch people play, you can get some analytics, and you can evaluate, is the idea good? Is it bad? Do you need to create a different one? Do you iterate, etc.? And that's a far faster process than just taking a game on the usual engines and then working out how to distribute it, how to get it onto a store and submit. Point 2 is we think we're going to see a huge increase in the number of people who actually create games and interactive experiences. We often use this analogy of film and TV in this pyramid to try and explain. So for decades, it was a situation where only large professional companies owned the TV and film industry. And then we had the film scene came along with it, the film indie scene. But then we had, of course, YouTube's come in, and the likes of TikTok, mobile phones and webcams, and now it's kind of democratized. Everyone can now create this kind of content, and whole new markets have been made. And we think the same is set to happen in games. So we already have a strong AAA scene and a vibrant indie scene in games, but currently most players do not see themselves as creators. But with games like Creator and Dreams on PlayStation, the creation experience is accessible and right there in the game alongside the play experience. Roblox is an example of this already happening for the younger gaming audience. But by using cloud gaming, we're able to deliver far higher quality assets and without a massive installation download, which would cause friction. So the second point is we'll see many more game creators and basically a democratization of game development. My third point is how new game genres are set to emerge. So when it's faster to try out ideas with less risk, and when there's lots more creators, then we're very more likely to see games pushed as a medium, new genres defined, and maybe even redefining what a game is. So one example is that if you have same day creation and publishing, then games and memes becomes a very real thing. You can see a topical news overnight, something that is you're passionate about, make a game, push it out, let your audience engage with it in the same day. So that's one aspect. Another one we think is where we're going to see a long tail of games, much like we do with YouTube. And that means you can have very, very niche games that appeal to a very specific target audience. That's something else that seems like it will happen. And the fourth point is that games are going to start traveling more with their players, which will lead to new ways to presenting your game to them. So Creator is on Stadia, which means we have the exact same build, and that then deploys to Chromecast, PC, and mobile. And then at runtime, we can detect the device type, and we only offer the advanced mode with when the keyboard and mouse is plugged in to do the programming. And that makes sense because you wouldn't want to do programming on the controller or with the mobile touch interface. So you can do that with current technology, but it's slow and time intensive. You have to take a fork of your code base, you then have to submit it, you have to maintain that as you do updates. It's much easier when you're dealing with a single version of your game. So point 4 is that more games will naturally be available on multiple hardware devices, and that opens up new avenues for context switching according to what the player is doing. And my final point is more of a multiplier on all of the previous points, but it looks set to be such a game changer that it's the main reason for us wanting to state our claim as a cloud-based game development platform. And that game changer is 5G. So although the timings are up in the air, 5G looks set to enable current home internet speeds or faster across the entire planet. Many developing countries have not bothered with cabled internet and are jumping straight into 3G, 4G, and now heading towards 5G. So we're going to see even more players of high-quality games around the globe. But I think the big one is really the change to playing habits that get enabled by 5G and cloud gaming. We're looking at a future where players who are enjoying an intense gaming session at home on their big TV can then just throw the exact same game onto their phone and carry on playing it as they walk out of the house and get on the bus, etc. So that traveling and context switching becomes, I think, a key component of your design in games in the future. Currently, when we make games, we think of the context of what type of platform we're targeting. So if it's PC and console, you kind of know you're looking at people who are going to have a serious session with your game. They're going to spend at least 30 minutes or an hour plus, and you can tempo your game accordingly. If you're doing a mobile game, you'd only cater for like a short session, 1 or 2 minute type game experiences. But when this starts to happen, you'll need to cater for both, and you'll need to understand how players will want to interact depending on the situation that they're in. So I think a very sort of simplistic example would be like a first-person shooter experience in the living room, and then when you're on the train or on the bus, you start sorting out crafting better gear or planning the strategy for your next attack, etc. I think as I say, it's a simple idea. It'll be fascinating to see what other context switching ideas happen as we really get to grips with these new situations of play. So those are our 5 observations of what we believe we're going to see as emerging trends for creativity from these tools, cloud gaming and 5G. We're going to see improved creativity, more people creating games, new game genres, more gamers to play those genres, and new ways that those games will be enjoyed by the players. And one cheeky last image from me, because I've started playing with a meme generator and I couldn't resist. Thank you.
I appreciate the inclusion of memes. It's always good to keep it fun and lighthearted. Thank you so much, Chris. Next, we will welcome Neil Alphonso from Splash Damage. Splash Damage are multi-player game gurus. Their next title, Outcasters, will be cloud native. Neil is going to discuss the new types of gameplay and modes that are enabled by the cloud.
Hi. So really, I'm actually not going to be talking much about the game. I'm going to be talking about what I learned developing the game for a platform like Stadia. One of the things I have is just a very brief trailer to kind of show off what the game is, because it's actually kind of secondary to how it has changed development over what we've been, how we've been developing for a long time. So am I up? Or do we have the video?
Sur mon lit à bouffer sa langue en buvant prends mon whisky quant à moi un peu dormi, vide et bris, mais j'ai du dormi dans la gouttière où j'ai eu un flash en 4 couleurs. Allez hop, banana, c'est tiré, c'est barré, enfin c'est marre à tout casser, les pieds, le bar me descend seul comme un grand frère.
Oh yeah!
All right, so that's me as one of our characters. Obviously, I haven't had enough coffee. But yeah, so hello, I'm Neil. I'm Studio Creative Director at Splash Damage. And hello, Canada. I was actually born in Mississauga. So hi, home. But yeah, So splash damage has been around for a couple of decades, you know, and we've grown a lot as a studio. And one of the things I want to talk about is how and why we wanted to make a game on the cloud that streams to players, and you know what we've learned. The three basic things I'm going to cover are how it impacted our product strategy, how it impacted our architecture, and our overall production. And I appreciate that as a creative director, none of those things sound particularly creative, but these all impacted how creative we can be with the game. Just one of the things I'll go through. So this is our office on a rare sunny day in London. Yet we haven't seen it much this year. But we started as your kind of typical, you know, above a garage shop of, you know, 5 people. And now we're well over 300. And this kind of outlines our studio's chronology from a platform perspective. And what I hope this shows is, I'm exaggerating with the floppy disk. We didn't ship those games on 3.5 floppies, but you know, we've always wanted to make sure that we're looking at what new platforms will give us. So that's been a part of our focus throughout our studio's history, and that's definitely the case with Outcasters on Stadia. So when I talk about product strategy, Chris has actually mentioned this in his presentation right before me. So this is going to be super intuitive, but it's device scalability and how native it has been for this service. So, you know, we developed this game like any other that we do. We're mostly on our PC, mostly on workstations. But, you know, through Stadia, you're on all these different platforms. And this might seem like a small thing, but it's really, really not. I actually, it's one of the gaming moments in my career I'll never forget when I played this game on my phone, having always played it on PC. And phone screens actually look brilliant, to be honest. But you know, because we never specifically were authoring for that, we tailored the UI to be able to scale like this. But you know, oftentimes you've got completely separate, you know, clients, operating systems, all these different things you've got to manage, and we didn't have to do that. And to be able to get that kind of out of the box was pretty amazing. And I think it's something we'll definitely be leveraging in the future. Another big one is client security. So this is what I meant by architecture. So we've been making multiplayer games for a long time, as long as our studio has been around. And as we've traditionally made kind of more hardcore games, we have this saying. This is a saying through any multiplayer game developer. You never want to trust what the player is doing because people cheat like crazy. This is in terms of progression, in terms of hacking. But yeah, I mean, it's maybe stating the obvious, but you know, when you're developing in the cloud, the player doesn't have access to their server. Their client is in a blade somewhere, somewhere else in the country, and there's so much you don't actually have to worry about, and you wouldn't believe the number of times where we're pinching ourselves like into a 10-minute discussion, being like, "Wait a minute, do we even need to worry about this?" No, we don't. Okay, we're good. Let's move on. Taking that out of the equation actually has saved us a lot of effort and energy. And last but not least is development efficiency. So this is just how it has impacted our overall production. And apologies for doing a creative director sort of graph here. This is very back of napkin math. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is the efficiency that we got from people just not having to download builds, right? So the first one is sort of over a 30 dev month project, 30 devs for 18 months with 20 minutes of download a day, right? And you can factor in maybe not all your team is going to be downloading builds and play testing, though they should be. Your game will be better if they are. And that you can do other things while you're downloading, but still there's friction to that. And that's before we were developing this game before this year happened, and we had to move everybody home, where we didn't have an office quality network connection. So I've very conservatively added a 50% sort of buffer onto that for the below graph, and you can see. So this is actually developer months that are spent over the course of a project for these for downloading. And I didn't want to put a dollar tag on it, but it is significant. And this just shows you how these things adds up. And this is for a small game. So I think that we're really considering in the future is when we make a multi-platform title, whether we'll always be doing this on Stadia as well, because a few developers have mentioned it this year with the shift from work from home that their Stadia versions have been a real lifesaver. I think the Avengers and Destiny have been mentioned as a couple of those, but it's been really interesting to look at. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I think is going to happen next, because obviously cloud gaming has been tried a few times. We have Gakai and all this OnLive, all these things from years ago, and now we've got PS Plus. We got loads of things happening. So a little bit of crystal ball. I'm a believer, though, the best way to predict the future is to look to the trends of the past. And so a story that I'm fond of telling is what I used to have to do, right? When I never understood why Netflix sent me DVDs in the post, and they're called Netflix, but I think they knew what they were doing. This isn't me. Like I wouldn't have gotten Friends, but anyway. I definitely watched all of DS9 through Netflix, but not Friends. But yeah, so this, this is mirrored through other industries, and I can give you another one just in video games. People forget what Steam was like when it launched, and everyone was complaining because we had to get Half-Life 2 through it, but it wasn't great. To be kind, when it shipped, it wasn't great, but over time, everybody thinks of it as pretty rock solid now, right? We take it for granted. And I think that's, with how broadband is going to expand this year, in the coming years, based on what's happened with the world this year, I think this technology will have a real foothold and have a meaningful impact on the future. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Neil. That's great to hear. And finally, we will hear from Thierry Boulanger from Sabotage Studio. Thierry is a game designer, director, and the writer of The Messenger. Thierry will discuss how to capture the magic and nostalgia we feel about playing games as kids.
Hey, all right. Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, so my name is Thierry. I work at Sabotage Studio in Quebec City. We've been going on since 2016, and we make retro-inspired games. So I don't have slides, by the way, and in these panels or talks or things, I usually get tagged in as your local emotional mess when they want to pitch in a little bit of disconnection and the more of the emotional side to creation. So yeah, what I like to talk about is essentially why even create in the first place, right? And also when it comes to innovation, just sort of my perspective as a creative, where innovation is great, absolutely, and but if we step away from the technical side, what are some of the things that we'd like to make sure that we don't lose along the way, right? And so, well, it goes into the backstory, and the why create in the first place is usually as a first contact with a creation that kind of hits you so strong that you then wanted to partake, in the craft. So, well, my story is pretty basic. I'm mid-30s, so Mario was the big one. It was the click moment that it was the thing I could just do forever, and then I did, and then it made me skip school and not want to study, and eventually made me study, right? And so when I got into my career, I realized that I didn't get the fix I wish it would give me, this thing I used to feel about games. I didn't get it from working on games. And then I thought, wow, why isn't it happening? I'm making games. That was the dream. And so I actually started a retro collection of games, trying to recapture this feeling again. I'm like, if I'm replaying all these old titles, surely it will conjure up the feeling that I'm looking for. And then that also didn't happen. Then I realized what I actually miss is really being 9 years old, right? And so there's something to be said about that, is that surely, yes, there was something great about these games, but what we remember from them, they're games that actually never existed, right? Because we don't miss, stiff controls and repetitive music and things like that, or, unfair difficulty. And so the games I wanted to make, I wanted to be a part of as projects, they essentially never existed. It's a thing that I felt that was real to me, and that was real to so many people that they ended up doing this for a living, but it never truly existed. So I'm still trying to rack my brain and trying to figure this all out on a daily basis. And so for me, just the why create in the first place starts from sort of the satisfaction, right? There's something where reality or real life isn't quite doing it, or isn't quite enough, right? Which the satisfaction, if you take it positively, can turn into imagination, right? Is that, oh well, what's the change you'd like to see? Which would you rather the world or life was, And so then you can start dreaming up a world, and then after you dream of the world, you start thinking, oh, I wish that I could go there, right? But then you can't go, and that's kind of sad, And so you can't go, but you can tell other people about it. Then if they also wish that they could go, you can kind of get together, and then you can build it, right? And once it's built, you still can't go, but now you can show it to so many other people, and then all those people can kind of gather around this thing, and it's like no one gets to go, but if enough people agree that it might be fun to get to go, and it kind of exists in a way, right? And so if you have enough people gathering around it and saying like, yeah, this is a good thing, I'm glad you made this, I would say that's the real paycheck, for the game devs, is that, well, we made a thing, and it did provide escapism, and it did remind people of why they like to do these things, because there's so many games now that when you boot one up, it's like, well, is it actually any good? And when it happens, it can feel kind of rare, if that makes sense. And so how do we take this from the abstract to the concrete, right? And so you have this vision, you have this idea, this urge to create a thing. Then it's like, okay, let's take this to production. So you talk to your team, and then the team's like, okay, cool, I kind of see it, but there's no way to see it because emotion is so much more complex than vocabulary, right? And so you've already toned it down or made it less precise just by telling the idea. So as you enter production, it's like, okay, I have this thing that I see, which is very abstract, so it's not so much like I truly know what it is. And then the team starts working, and then you put these things on top of one another, and you're like, oh, okay, this bit is sticking out, we need to iron this out, and this should be green instead of yellow or whatever. And you kind of have at it until you refine it, and then it sort of looks like what you meant to make. And at first it's unclear, right? And it's an analogy we use often, which a lot of people know, I guess, but it's like, so you're on the South Pole and you want to get to the North Pole, so you can't see it; it's too far, right? First step is that, well, you know where South is, right? And so you can step away from that, and it gets you closer to your goal. There's no way to go further from South without being closer to North. And so you do that long enough, in the creative process, that would be like mapping what you don't want to see in your game, what the irritants would be, what the pitfalls would be in terms of gameplay, art direction, and all of that. And at some point, you'll be far enough from South that you can just turn around and you can see North, right? And then it's like this click moment where in production, the whole team sees what you meant to convey in the first place. And now you're shifting gears, and it's like, it's a whole different process, because now you're like, everyone sees it. And so the filters that everyone has on your team, they start proposing ideas that just fit right into the core vision. And now instead of talking about what you don't want to make, you start talking about what you're making. And all of that becomes a process of letting the game emerge as what it is trying to be, really, in a way. And so the other thing that's really important to that process is to work with no ego. I'm lucky to be on a smaller team. We're 20 people at Sabotage. And that's one thing that is super important to me, is that we have to stick together, because you draw a circle. If every team member is a dot, into where they're at in their respective crafts, you kind of have to draw a circle that includes everyone. And if the UI person is like, well, I think it's over here, you're like, yeah, but now the area is that, and we can't deal with that. Just stick with us. Maybe you're right. Maybe we will end up there. We have to all get there at the same time. Otherwise, each of us start feature creeping, and we end up with a big mess that we can't deal with. So it's like these baby steps, these incremental steps. And more importantly, if you were right that we do end up where you thought we would, you still respect the process that it still would have been a bad call for you to go there right away, because then everyone's being pulled there. And if we end up wanting to go there, then you feel friction and you won't want to follow, or you have so much ground to cover to get back to us. So, and that's the thing that I hope with innovation, as teams get bigger, and as we have these technical things that we can do now, everything can get so big. I just hope that we don't lose this core, this why even create in the first place, and this managing to have visualizing an experience that feels a specific way, and then all working together towards that. And it's kind of the same. The analogy I use often is with music. Now that every composer has access to a synthetic orchestra, and virtually infinite memory, for the audio, it's like, we'll just do the 4-minute intro and everything, and it's all just like more like a score, and there's never really any hooks to the melody. Whereas, if you just give me 4 channels and a 30 seconds loop, you're gonna get to the point, And so for me, this retro inspiration thing is, by keeping these boundaries, there's a kind of unique kind of experience that can emerge, and I hope that we can find a way to keep things simple, even though it gets increasingly complex on the technical side. So yeah, that's what I had to ramble about today.
Well, I certainly appreciate your ramblings. I came up with some questions of my own just hearing that. We are now going to be going to the panel, where you can hear from all of the panelists and ask them questions about their presentations, creativity in general, and anything else that you may have. So please make use of the Q&A channel in Pine. I will be moderating it. But first, we have a question from that channel, and it is, how you try to stay creative and innovative while keeping your studio identity, particularly if you're known for a certain art style or type of game. This can be confusing to gamers as well as a pleasant surprise.
Oh, I think I could chip in with that. So really, it's like sequelitis, right? You've got to kind of stay true to what people know you for and what you do well, but at the same time, we're all creatives. I mean, this is really what Thierry was getting at, right? Is that we all have this urge to create and try different things. And how do you direct what you're doing and what you're going to take on? And it's never an easy process, right? It's almost, you have a yin yang. You have the people who tend to be more conservative, and you tend the people who want to go wilder. And it's how do you manage that process and keep everybody talking to each other? Again, as I think that Thierry mentions, people have to be pulling in the same direction with the same goals in mind, or else they'll just start getting selfish, and it turns into like a mini culture war. No metaphors at all.
So now we have a question that's actually directed at Chris. Does the blockchain vision from John or Mythical excite you, scare you relative to your own user content generated efforts? User generated content efforts, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it excites me. It doesn't freak me out. It's what John's talking about is another interesting kind of trajectory that we're looking at in the future. When I was doing my slides, the word metaverse kept kind of hovering in the background as to, do I add that or not? I think there's a definite part of blockchain within that. If we start having different kind of, the terminology is a bit kind of rudimentary still, but if Creator is an outpost in the metaverse, the global metaverse, then having blockchain to kind of hold assets together and maybe even travel those assets around the different games and the different offerings, I think that's really exciting, really intriguing. So yeah, I look forward to that. I don't know if John, should I be scared of you?
I wouldn't think so. I think it really, Chris, it really becomes that palette of tools, right? And it's just another brush you have to paint your vision of, right? I think that's where it gets exciting. I think the one challenge, I think platforms like Creta and Roblox, and then hopefully ours as well as a contributor into that world, starts helping with some of that interactivity or interoperability, let's say. And I think the only challenge I would say to that is I used to be a studio head on Call of Duty, right? So there was five game studios that worked on Call of Duty, and we had a hard enough time getting a soldier, an asset soldier for a soldier asset from one game into another game, and we owned all the studios. So I think there's definitely a lot of work to get to that like metaverse where things can move back and forth between properties. But I think that the authenticity and the verifiable assets become really, really exciting. So
cool, agreed.
Awesome. So this is kind of a question for all of you. We've heard a lot today about how the cloud and technology is affecting the creation of game content or game content itself. How do you see these advancements influencing game development, particularly with development during this pandemic?
I think Alphonso kind of covered that fairly well, to be honest. I mean, so I can kind of plus what you said there as well, that it happened perfectly for us. We were basically going into our alpha, beta, master phase, and we all suddenly got sent home, but all of our dev kits are in the cloud. It was not a problem at all. We could just connect out to the servers in Google Cloud and just connect to the Stadia. So yeah, it made our development process a lot easier, which is exactly what you found as well, I think, Alphonso.
Yeah, our biggest challenge has been people's home internet.
Yeah.
But yeah, apart from that, and again, as I mentioned, I mean, I see that getting better and better, right? You're going to see it reflected in wider society, right? You're already seeing a degree. I mean, okay, I live in London, so it's really obvious that people are leaving the city because it's always been very expensive, and people are realizing you can work more from home. What technology has allowed, I think it's going to be a pretty big shift in how things are and how people work. And this is technology that really helps enable that. And there'll be more of the same, right? Other technologies will come out doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I think if I can add one thing, I think what's interesting is we weren't a cloud. We're one of the few on the panel here that's not a cloud game right now on like a Stadia. And I think what the most interesting thing for us is we kind of figured out getting a game to market, getting, the game dev side was okay, getting assets checked in and all that. The biggest problem we had was user testing. And I think that was the biggest challenge for us, was how do we get the game in front of these user testing panels, because we still had to get that executable. And I think what you guys have with the cloud service has got to simplify that dramatically. And I think that's probably the biggest pain point we had as a non-cloud developer. But I think I'm guessing, I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that was probably a pretty straightforward process for you guys, right?
Yeah, very much. You
really
could
cool.
basically fill in a ticket and say, we need 12 more dev kits, please. And then that afternoon you have 12 more dev kits. It's just kind of as simple as that.
That's really cool.
That's actually an interesting one, because in a way, if you talk about like user research and how test labs have worked, and they've come leaps and bounds in the last couple of decades, really. But we found that really got thrown up in the air because they're based on sort of brick and mortar facilities, right? Where you have a scientific environment where people are isolated, and we haven't been able to do that. And the irony of that is people are in actual real world conditions, right? With like kids running about and cats, and which is actually, we should be adjusting to, because that's how people consume our work, right? So it's been super interesting in that regard, and it's kind of been a lesson in rolling with it, really.
Making sure you have a cat-proof game, cat understanding game. And I mean, I think it's also really interesting. Obviously, there are limitations when it comes to internet connection, but allowing for someone who might not have a powerful enough computer to either engage with content creation inside your own cloud-based game, or just in another set of tools to create. I think that helps lower the bar even more and allows for more people to express their creativity through the creation of games and game content.
That's certainly our goal. Yes. Yep. And it does seem to be coming to light as well. I mean, the fact that people can sit at the big screen and create content now, and just pull in. We use the phrase "standing on the shoulders of giants," where the deep end programmers, they can create these nice complex components, but then they just make a package, and then someone sitting on their sofa can just install that, configure the parameters, and off they go. They've got some like pathfinding or something else going on in their game that they could never have done themselves, but it's just there working on that cloud experience.
Yeah. So we have a question for Terry. What level of player appetite / demand do you see for your style of not nostalgic creativity versus all of the other tech and innovation driven creativity from others?
Well, it's certainly a niche, right? And it's the main thing when you front pixel art, and you say, hey, it's the retro platformer thing. The people are like, oh, there we go again. We've been hurt 1,000 times because we believed, and so you definitely have to go all in. But where we go with that is that the aesthetics are retro, but then we're modernizing the design in terms of storytelling and gameplay and all of that. And so, in a sense, the player's expectations become a core ingredient. So you take Messenger. We only have the one game out yet. We're hard at work on the second title, but so for this first one, it's the first look that you take at it. You judge it by its cover, and so you think it will be so simple that because in a sense if you take the delta of the starting point of your adventure and then where you end up, like the delta between those 2 points is kind of in a way the breadth of the experience, like how epic it was is how point A to point B had a lot of distance, and so we try to start from the simplest and most basic promise of like, hey, here's the 8-bit ninja fighting demons, but then as you start playing and as you start digging, there's a lot. and so what happens is that because the game flips on its head, at some point, and you kind of realize that it was all, not only was it all a metaphor, but it was also, you were right where we wanted you if you weren't expecting more than what you saw at first. Where it's kind of hard is to actually market this, because it's a thing where people are like, yeah, just play it, but I can't really tell you anything about it without spoiling it. So that would be a lesson learned, that like if your thing is 100% based on just the twist and there's no way you can tell anyone about it without ruining the entire thing, it's like, well, okay, so do I make a trailer where I show the twist and then people all gather, but then there's no surprises left once they play? Or do I not tell anyone and no one gathers because they'll never know it would have been good? So would you rather have 10 people that have the full experience or 100 people that are then disappointed that there isn't more than... Anyway, so I don't know if that answered any question, but that's the thing I'm still trying to solve, Do we preserve the experience or do we make sure that we're afloat, which fortunately we're afloat, but we feel the game had a good reception, but you need people to play it in the first place too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have just a few minutes left. So this may be our last question. I think this is one that anyone on the panel can answer. What are the management strategies that can foster creativity on your team? And what are the common mistakes that can kill creativity?
Judgment. Sorry if I can chip in here. Never judge any idea. Like if someone goes like, that's ridiculous, that's stupid, we won't do that. That's a buzz killer right there. You want people to feel, I'm sure the word is safe, but like you want people to feel like they can just say anything, they can just let it out. And we're just looking for what's good. If you kill the conversation by judging ideas, that's where because anyone who shares an idea feels a bit of insecurity doing it. But creativity always comes from vulnerability. So you want to welcome that, you want to encourage that, and then there's no way to talk about the vision without refining and getting closer to a common vision. So every time you talk about it, you're refining, and then everyone's filters get updated, and then as the creative director, the propositions that you get from the team are increasingly more on point with where the project is going, and then at some point it's just happening on its own. It's kind of magical, actually.
Yeah, I think there has to be a shared sense of purpose, right? As in, what are you all trying to do? Just that's the minimal constraint for ideas, right? And then anything's game, because then people don't get precious about turning things in the wrong direction, and then you get unexpected awesome stuff. And that's true of any organization, to be honest, any business, but especially true of creative ones, where you want creativity from people. And I completely agree with Thierry, right? You've got to defend people, and sometimes there are stupid ideas, to be honest, but you've got to defend people's right to actually say them, right? Because that's where you get the great things.
Wonderful. I think that those were all really wonderful answers, and the The micro talks themselves were really intriguing and inspiring. It was interesting to hear how each of your studios is approaching creativity, development, and even the products themselves and creativity from your users in different ways. So hopefully that discussion, the panel discussion, and the keynote has all of our viewers really excited to share their own thoughts. We will next be heading into our breakout sessions. Then we will have Brenda Romero join us for a fireside chat at 12:30 p.m. EST. So make sure to be back for that. You absolutely won't want to miss it. The breakout sessions will be taking place in the breakout tab on Pine. So go ahead and find them there. And you must click out on the breakout tab and then join a room in it to discuss with others. You can have your camera enabled, or you can stay comfy in your PJs. I know that we're all quite used to that these days. But first, we're going to go to a 5-minute break. So grab water and then hop into those breakout sessions. And we'll see you back here later for the fireside chat with Brenda Romero.